All right, and we can get started. So again, mahalo nui for being here today. My name is Dana Shapiro. I'm the general manager of the Hawaiʻi ʻUlu Co-op. The Hawaiʻi ʻUlu Co-op is a farmer-owned business based on Hawaii Island, but with members on Maui and Oahu as well. And we promote sustainable agriculture, diversified farming practices, and specifically agroforestry as a method for cultivating ulu regeneratively. And we have an amazing panel of presenters with us today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them as it's their turn to speak. So first up, we have Andrew Trump. Andrew is Vice President of Island Harvest, an organic farm in North Kohala, managing about 700 acres of macadamia nuts, and in recent years diversified with ulu plantings managed using intensive silvopasture with over 1,000 head of tropical hair sheep rotating through the orchard on a regular basis. Andrew has also been a board director for the Hawaiʻi ʻUlu Co-op since 2018 and has helped the co-op with numerous initiatives, including assisting to develop our most recent guide, Ulu Agroforestry in Hawaii. So mahalo, Andrew, and take it away.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's great to see such a great turnout. And yeah, just thank you for taking time this evening to dig into agroforestry with us. So really kind of what kicked off having an event like tonight is the Ulu Co-op was able to get some grant money to be able to put together an Ulu agroforestry in Hawaii guide. So there's a number of us that have been working on this guide to provide not necessarily a complete resource on how to do agroforestry. That's not necessarily what this guide is, but it's an insight into how our farmers in the co-ops are currently doing agroforestry, some production considerations, and just getting people familiarized with agroforestry, specifically from people who are doing it with Ulu. So I was able to help put together this guide along with many others. And it's now available on our website, eatbreadfruit.com, under the Farmer Resources page. And I'm sure someone can link it in the chat if you haven't seen it already. So it's about, it's a 20+ page guide that is really a good introduction to Ulu agroforestry. And just really briefly before we get into kind of some of our experts tonight that are going to be diving into different parts of agroforestry and different approaches to it, I just wanted to really briefly give you a look at sort of what's in this guide and give us at least some common definitions that we can be thinking about. So we put together a definition, and not everyone follows this definition for agroforestry, but agroforestry is a form of agriculture integrating tree crops and other structural elements of forests to help farms mimic nature, fostering ecosystem services that can generate both environmental and economic benefits, as well as some unique challenges. The USDA has a little bit of a different definition, and that definition was given to provide a framework across the United States for agroforestry. But there's 5 main practices that we're looking at that the USDA has identified, and those are alley cropping, forest farming, riparian forest buffers, silvopasture, and windbreaks. So those 5 agroforestry practices are implemented in a number of ways, but our guide goes through different farmers doing some of these practices, and I'm just going to give you a brief insight into that. So you can go to the next slide, Kenta. In the guide, we talk about, benefits of agroforestry. How does farming this way and growing this way benefit the environment, the farmer, and the community? Next slide. We give a brief look into what, as of 2021, some of our farmers responded to a survey asking, what type of agroforestry practices are you implementing? And we had, a decent response, and a little less than 50% of the respondents were doing things like alley cropping, multi-story cropping, silvopasture, windbreaks, and nearly all the respondents, although they weren't necessarily doing explicit agroforestry practices. They're engaged in some sort of regenerative or sustainable practice, which is an ethos of many of the members of the co-op. Next slide. So we go through these farmer profiles that were put together that give real life examples of farmers in the co-op that are implementing these practices. And we have some graphics that kind of show what the layout of, this is an alley cropping layout that Tom Menezes from Hawaiian Crown Plantation does, where he has ʻUlu and then cacao in the center rows, and there's some synergy providing shade and also providing wind breaks for the cacao that are wind sensitive. So that's an example of that. You can go to the next slide. This is our farm. We used to have a lot of sheep that were intensively grazed through the macadamia nut orchards that that Island Harvest manages. Now we have a small herd of less than 100, but we do rotate them through our ʻUlu orchard. And in the guide, you can see some of the challenges as well as the benefits of doing silvopasture, which is grazing animals in a permanent tree cropping system. Next slide. Another profile that we have is of using cattle from Hana Maui. Hana Ranch uses cattle in their silvopasture. And then the next slide. And then you have Punachix that is doing some diversified agroforestry practices as well as silvopasture with chickens. So this is just kind of a brief introduction to what is in the guide. And I encourage everyone after, if you haven't looked at the guide yet, go through it and see what the different farmers are doing in our in the co-op currently. And this isn't meant to be exhaustive and, you know, give a silver bullet as to, you know, this is how you should be doing agroforestry, but it is to give insight into this is what is currently being done. And so that people, including some of the people that we're going to be hearing from later today, can build upon that, do it better, do it more extensively, more intensively, and so that we can all kind of improve our, you know, sustainable regenerative practices, but also improve our agroforestry practices as a Hawai'i agricultural community. And yeah, that's all from me, and looking forward to hearing all this great wealth of knowledge that is coming up.
Thank you, Andrew. And now we're going to be hearing from Dr. Noah Lincoln. Noah is a professor of indigenous crops and cropping systems at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and also the production advisor to the Hawaii ʻUlu Co-op. And he is sitting next to me, so I'm just gonna let him take the screen.
Hey, aloha kako. Welcome everybody. Wonderful to see such an awesome turnout and interest in this topic. So I'm just going to give a real brief, hopefully under 5 minutes. Just want to give some context in terms of, you know, the traditional implementation of agroforestry and ʻUlu agroforestry in Hawaii. You know, what our ancestors practiced in the past, you know, and honestly, what a lot of people are, you know, aiming to return to today. So this is just, I really love this image, really illustrates some of the environmental diversity of Hawaii. And we all know Hawaii is one of the most ecologically diverse places on the planet. And our ancestors, you know, adapted their agriculture very specifically to the different ecologies of Hawaii. And so as we look, you know, just at the Kohala Peninsula alone, we would see a range of ag systems, from our flooded, irrigated lo'i systems, growing kalo in the river valleys, to extensive agroforestry systems that often occupied the wet slopes of our volcanoes. In the valley slopes, we saw extensive colluvial agriculture where the erosion off the valleys was regenerating soil and making it very fertile. In the leeward areas, the mesic environments where it's not as wet, our soils remained highly productive, and we saw really intensive forms, basically of row cropping. And then even in some really, really harsh environments, you know, we saw some very unique adaptations to kind of opportunistic forms of ag, as well as a whole bunch of other forms across the landscape. And so just again, a real brief look at traditional agroforestry, just kind of 3 points I want to make. The first is that it was the first form of agriculture that was extensively practiced in Hawaii. And when you look at our you know, creation, mo'olelo, our kind of cosmology of origin in Hawaii, and you look at those really, really early generations, you hear a lot about the huiMAU and the Noeʻau people, and they're really described as forest-dwelling people who persisted largely on banana. And you know, essentially, when our ancestors first came, Hawaii was forested down to the coast in virtually every environment. And so as our ancestors first settled these islands, they were operating within forest ecosystems, and therefore were practicing almost exclusively agroforestry. And it's only over time that they began to clear the forests and start to implement more intensive agricultural forms like the lo'i. But just like everywhere in Polynesia, agroforestry remained not just a component of traditional agriculture, but it remained the dominant form of traditional ag. And it took on a lot of different forms, again, largely depending on the ecology of the site. And so just three examples. One are kind of novel food forests, and these were really implemented in the areas of the lowest fertility, you know, areas that had really high rainfall, and that rainfall is depleting your soils. And if you don't have a forest, your soils just decline really, really rapidly in these high rain scenarios. And so in these cases, our ancestors really replaced the native forest with a novel forest, with a forest that was composed of species that was useful to them. And in these species, or in these forests, ʻUlu is often a dominant component, coupled with kukui, mountain apple, banana, coconut, and then a range of understory crops. Another well-documented system is the pā kukui system, where extensive forests were grown largely for the fertility that they brought. And in these systems, quick growing and quick decomposing forest species like kukui and hau and hala were often grown with the specific intention of cutting them down to create mulch, to create fertilizer that would then power the growth of other crops. And another system that our farm in South Kona is attempting to restore was known as the ʻUlu, which was a vast area of breadfruit agroforestry in the Kona landscape that was more intensively managed, you know, something closer to diversified agroforestry that we think of today. You know, well-spaced trees, lots of sunlight, lots of cultivation of ground crops in and around the breadfruit trees. And just my last slide here, you know, over the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of work to get a handle on the distribution of our ancestors' use of agroforestry. And so these are kind of our current thinking and understanding of where our ancestors were practicing agroforestry. And as you can see, it's a huge amount of the state. When you look at agroforestry practices, it essentially is about 50 to 60% of all the agriculture our ancestors were doing. If you add up all the lo'i and all the dryland systems and everything else, all of that together only equates to how much forest farming and agroforestry our ancestors were doing. So it was very important in the past, and we feel it should be important today as we think about agriculture in Hawaii. And with that, I'll turn it back to our host.
Hello, Noah. All right. So next up, we have Dave Sansone. Spotlight him there. So Dave has 20 years of experience developing low input and low maintenance agroforestry systems that let nature do the work to beat the weeds and increase production. He offers consultation, design, installation, and education services to a wide range of clients. He's based on Hawaii Island, and he'll be sharing with us some of the more modern perspectives on agroforestry to follow Noah's traditional perspective. So take it away, Dave. It looks like Dave may be frozen.
Okay.
There he is.
Can you hear me now?
Now we do. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So yes, thank you all for joining us today. I just want to say, yeah, agroforestry is, as Noel was saying, it's a very old practice, and it will continue to as a practice as we're seeing right now with our modern agriculture systems failing around the world. So the reason why we're doing agroforestry is for the ecosystem services that people have been discussing. And that's, weed control, increased fertility, increased diversity. So there's lots of benefits with agroforestry, but as we tried to express in the guide, there's unique challenges that come with every planting that we're doing. With all the diversity. So I'm just going to, skip through some slides and show some examples of practices that you can do on your gardens and farms. A very important thing to think about is much of our agriculture today is dependent on fossil fuels. For mowing between trees, the cost is going up, right? The cost of fertilizer is going up. So it's important as we develop our agroforestry systems, I believe, to design the machines out. So that way we have mulch grown right there on site. We have ground covers. We have our fertility, our free nitrogen from the air. So we have all these benefits. So yeah, as you move forward, just try to cut that out. So yes, windbreaks, very critical here where we have, hurricanes and many sensitive crops. So a windbreak around anywhere we grow is pretty vital. They can also serve as pest breaks where we're blocking the pests from seeing the food that we're growing. So the windbreaks are just pretty standard agroforestry practice. And if you could show the next slide. Forest farming is pretty cool. Growing plants in a forest kind of a setting is actually a way to grow more valuable crops like what we see here. We have kava or ava growing in the shade of timber trees. It is a little challenging at managing your different layers of vegetation, but the benefits are pretty amazing, especially in arid areas because of the shade you get from your trees. Next slide. Okay, so another practice in our toolbox of agroforestry practices is hedgerow alley cropping. And what it comes down to is it's just basically a row of trees or shrubs or even vetiver grass, could even be lemongrass, but a row of something and then a row of your crop and then another row of your support species, which can be chopped and dropped or just pruned up. But the benefit that it offers is often soil improvement, moderating your environment, providing part shade for things that need it. And then you see off in the distance, we have the ʻulu in the picture there. So that's how we can actually feed our plants and then step away from the mowers. Okay, next picture. Okay, so this is a different type of multi-story agroforestry where we're growing the hedgerow right there with the young plant. So you could do it with large trees, or you could do it with the small trees. The amazing benefits we see with this is a dramatic improvement of the soil all around your plants. So within a year to 2 years, pigeon pea, a commonly used shrub plant here, and daikon radish grown in the beginning, and kalo grown with anything else, will turn your soil to a deep dark black, up to 3 feet deep, where it will look like earthworm castings. So much more complex though, because you have to manage your weeds. Next slide. Okay, riparian forest buffers are basically plantings to absorb nutrients, the runoff from our agriculture systems. So ʻUlu is a tree, and you can plant it, near water, and it helps to absorb nutrients. Native plants are a great one to grow in those settings. Things like ma'amaki. Just be careful with using fertilizer on those plantings. We don't want to be fertilizing our ʻUlu trees along the waterways, because that would then pollute the water. Okay, next slide. Silvopasture. So this is an amazing way nowadays to clear land. Some people call it a animal tractor system, but using different animals in rotation to clear the vegetation to then make it so you can plant. So it's a way to really cut down on your land clearing costs. And then, as we can see here, this is a photo from the Trump's farm, how they were using animals to keep the grass down between trees. So it helps the trees, it fertilizes them, but you do need to consider the effects that the animals have on trees. So often putting a fence around each tree is needed. Next slide. Okay, so here we are. My favorite kind of agroforestry is using succession. If there's a clearing, weeds are going to grow, right? So instead of just planting 1 crop or 2 crop and then having to do lots of weed control or weed mat or mulch, I like to plant my trees, shrubs, ground covers, and cover crops, everything all at once. Next slide, please. And this is what this spot looked like 4 months later after planting, where I didn't do any work. This is a client of mine, Edible Landscape. I came back in 4 months, it looks like this, and there's half an hour of work for this zone. So when you get it right, it'll grow like a forest, it'll improve the conditions, and then increase your productivity. But like I said, it is challenging. If you don't get the weeds out of the situation, you actually create a lot more work. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Companion planting is what this is all about. So as you move forward, just think about plants that are opposite of each other. Tall and skinny goes well with low and flat. Here we have a weed barrier. You can do this around your farms and gardens. That's lemongrass. You could also use comfrey. And then also ground covers. Very essential. Next slide. And this I call the intercover crop, where you can see vetiver planted there and perennial peanut to be the ground cover. And then we have a whole mix of seeds sown. And then I add mulch on top of that. And that's the recipe to clear these areas and then make them weed-free locations so you can keep on planting. Next slide. That's what it looks like once it germinates. Keep on going. And then last section here, another practice that is being revolutionized here in Hawaii is beneficial microorganisms. So growing microbes from the soil, lots of benefits, and you can use pretty much any carbohydrate source, including taro skins that are cooked. Next slide. When we collect those microbes, we turn it into a shelf-stable, basically a biofertilizer by adding brown sugar. Next slide. If you add that to biochar and just basically all the nutrients you can think of, add those microbes and then strain it, and then you get these amazing microbial blooms. Next slide. That is what's going to do the work to move nutrients for you, reduce your water needs. Next slide. This is an old dirt road where now we have microbes growing on the surface of the old road. Next slide. And that looks like that's it. That's it. Okay, yeah, whoever's on the other end, there should be a play button right below the screen there. Would you mind pressing the play button? Okay. Oh, it didn't work. Okay. Point being, the soil there was dusty, dry, ash-based soil that was blowing away at planting time. When I press down on it, it's like a sponge. It's like, that's 2 months after planting. So agroforestry with these microbes creates a whole ecosystem, which makes it so we don't need the boat to keep us going. So thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, feel free to let me know. My name is Dave Sansone at Agroforestry Design.
Thank you, Dave. Sorry, the play button didn't work. But we'll go ahead to our next presenter. Let's see, Noel, are you still on?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. All right, I'm looking for your image to spotlight you. Oh, there you are.
Great.
Okay, perfect. All right, so our next presenter is Noel Dickinson. And Noel is a small farmer born and raised in Hawaii. And she's currently the coordinator for the Breadfruit Institute at the National Tropical Botanical Garden, or NTBG. Noel attended the University of Hawaii in Hilo, where she received a plant tissue culture certification, in addition to a BS in horticulture with specialization in tropical plant science and agroecology. Her work includes the establishment, management, and monitoring of the regenerative organic breadfruit agroforestry demonstration at McBride Garden on the island of Kauai, as well as collaborative work to conserve the breadfruit collection across NTBG's gardens. So thank you for being with us tonight, Noel, and go ahead and start the presentation.
Thanks, Dana. Again, my name is Noel Dickinson, and I'm coordinator for the Breadfruit Institute, which is a part of the National Tropical Botanical Garden, a nonprofit. The Institute is responsible for the care and curation of NTBG's collection of breadfruit varieties and wild relatives, which represent 3 species, including 150 different varieties of breadfruit from across the Pacific. So my work over the last 5 years is primarily focused on breadfruit agroforestry. And so today I'll be giving a brief presentation about some of the aspects of establishing and maintaining the agroforestry demonstration here at McBride Garden. So the regenerative organic breadfruit, so last slide actually, sorry. So the agroforestry demonstration here at McBride Garden was established in 2017. Originally, it was called the Breadfruit Research Orchard. The site is 1.5 acres and composed of a subset of the larger breadfruit collection, which can be found at NTBG's Kahanu Garden in Hana on the island of Maui. So here you'll see encircled in white are the 31 Artocarpus accessions, which represent 3 species of Artocarpus and 11 different varieties of breadfruit. This is a conceptual layout, which was developed along with a breadfruit agroforestry guide in collaboration with Craig Elovich. Next slide, please. So here you'll see about 5 years later, the agroforestry demonstration from above, after having over 240 different varieties and cultivars planted. It's well on its way to being established. Next slide. And then I wanted to highlight a couple, or the most challenging portion of really initiating the agroforestry project. And so Because of having young and established breadfruit trees, they served as a backbone, and they also provided several opportunities to transition from field or orchard to agroforest. And so highlighted here, the most challenging aspect of establishing the agroforest has been cultivating those field areas. So during years 1 and 2, some of the practices implemented included a 6 to 7 month rotation pictured here, which uses different mowing techniques, tillage, and sowing of cover crop cocktails, as well as the planting of a dense hedgerow consisting of mostly tea and cassava. We also utilize the spaces around the established breadfruit trees for intercropping and intensive rotation of short-term crops like leafy greens, which yielded roughly 1,200 pounds of produce within the first 3 months of the project. Next slide. So this is the same area in year 3, about 3 to 4 months after wrapping up the last rotation of cover crop. The densely planted and fast-growing hedgerow has flushed out and was ready to be used as biomass. And also pruning or chopping and dropping the hedgerow of cassava allowed for space for the tea leaf, kalo, and ko to really establish themselves. And you can really see the growth of those young breadfruit as well. Next slide. And so here's a couple of more views of the same regenerative area currently from a different vantage point. So sugarcane is the dominant biomass used in these areas. Along with leafy greens, there are more lignified or woody materials available to be used as mulch for weed suppression and mostly for soil building. The frequency and intensity of mowing and weeding is significantly less at this point. The predominant weed being removed right now is a type of grass that kind of creeps along the soil surface and is relatively easy to pull out. And so there's less time spent weeding. And the mowing is done every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the time of year, versus multiple times per week over larger areas in the first 2 years. Next slide. And so in addition to monitoring practices and keeping historical soil sampling data or records and plant inventory, we collect yields data. And since establishing the demonstration in 2017, a little over 17 tons of fresh produce have been harvested from the agroforestry demonstration. And that equals to 12 tons of breadfruit and 5 tons of other types of agroforestry crops. In addition, there have been over 4,000 individual ornamental stems harvested from the demonstration so far. And so everything that's harvested, all fresh produce and ornamentals, are donated to local food banks and pantries which serve Kauai's communities. Next slide. Finally, I would like to mahalo Hawaii ʻUlu Co-op for inviting me to present some of my work in agroforestry. I'd like to also invite anyone interested in working with Mariella and I to visit our website and sign up to volunteer if you're going to be on Kauai on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Also check out our resources page for more information about breadfruit and agroforestry and the gardens itself. It takes a community, and so I would also like to acknowledge everybody who's supported the last 5 years of effort and continues to support. Thank you, that's it.
Mahalo nui, Noel. That was awesome. And I also did just want to acknowledge the Breadfruit Agroforestry Guide, which Noel mentioned, that was written in collaboration with Craig Elovich and Diane Ragone at the Breadfruit Institute. The Breadfruit Guide we just published is intended to sort of be a complement to that, or a follow-up in its focus on just spotlighting a variety of farmers in Hawaii using agroforestry in different ways. So please check out that guide if you haven't. It's great. So at this time, we're going to sort of transition a little bit and focus on sharing with you about two current in development ʻUlu agroforestry projects in Hawaii. They are both kind of unique in that there's a lot of planning and design and financial forecasting happening in advance of their implementation, and they're both currently in their development stage. The first one is a collaboration between Zach Mermel and huiMAU. Noeʻau Peralto is here with us today. And so I'm just gonna introduce both of them and then let them share about their project. Zach is the founder of ʻOla Design Group, an ecological land planning firm based on Hawaii Island. Over the past 15 years, Zach has conducted more than 300 land consultations and crafted dozens of landscape designs, both across the archipelago and also internationally. Dr. Noeʻau Peralto was born and raised in Waiakeauka in Hilo, Hawaii, and is a proud descendant of Kupuna from Koholalele Hamakua, where he now serves as the executive director of huiMALAMA Ike Ala Ūlili, or huiMAU. huiMAU is a grassroots Native Hawaiian nonprofit organization whose mission is to reestablish the systems that sustain our community through place-based educational initiatives and Aina-centered practices that cultivate abundance, regenerate responsibilities, and promote collective health and well-being. So mahalo, Zach and Noeʻau, for sharing with us, and I'll let you take it from here.
Mahalo nui, Dana, and mahalo nui for the invitation to share as part of this this presentation this evening. I'm honored to be here representing huiMALAMA Ike Ala Ūlili, our small grassroots community nonprofit organization rooted in the ahupua'a of Koholalele and Pa'awilo in the moku of Hamakua here on the island of Hawaii. Just to give you a little bit of context as to where we're located. Next slide. We're here on the northeast side of Hawaii Island, again in the moku of Hamakua, the Kalana or sub-district of Hamakua Hikina, and rooted in the ahupua'a of Koholalele and Pa'awilo, where we steward currently a total of approximately 115 acres and have approximately 12 acres currently in cultivation in agroforestry, cultivating primarily ʻUlu and a mix of other Hawaiian crops, and which we'll share about throughout this presentation. And we have currently about 120 ʻUlu trees in the ground growing at various stages of growth. Just to give you a little more background on our organization, next slide. Our organization was founded in 2011, just a little over a decade ago, by our ohana from this community here in Hamakua Hikina, really holding a vision for our community of noho papa, of a Hamakua that empowers ohana with the capacity to live and thrive in Hamakua, in this place for multiple generations, and really working to reestablish the systems that sustain our community to be able to support intergenerational aloha aina in place. Next slide. And as Dana already mentioned, our mission as an organization to reestablish the systems that sustain our community, really thinking broadly about what are the systems that come together when we have a thriving community. What are the systems in place that really need to be thriving as well, whether it be agricultural systems, education systems, food systems, our ecosystems, and trying to address these at various levels within our ahupua'a and within our community here in Hamakua Hikina. And our organization really was born out of an extensive genealogy, an extensive mo'olelo of aloha aina here in this place. Ohana dedicated to the health and well-being of these aina for hundreds of generations. And also, next slide, our organization was born out of and emerged out of a time of a much less extensive and much shorter genealogy of erasure in this place. And the kinds of agricultural practices, monocrop industrial agriculture, primarily in the form of sugarcane plantations, that really served to dismember and degrade the systems that sustain our community. This is a photo from our area here in 1905, where we see really the impacts of this form of agriculture on our aina, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, that really clear cut and plowed over those famous agricultural and agroforestry systems that Noah spoke of earlier, that fed our people and sustained our aina in ways that were pono for generations. Click. And I really wanted to bring into this presentation some of the words and voice of a kupuna from Hamakua, whose words really have inspired our work as well. That, we hear about this often in anecdotes shared within our families, but to see it written down in the newspapers in the 1940s, that this history isn't that old. It's not so far removed from us that we don't remember that this process of the removal of our agricultural systems, our agroforestry systems that really sustained us, didn't happen that long ago. And this kupuna hadi Lino Haupuo ke Ko'olau Safri Reinhardt, who lived in Kapulena near Honoka'a, wrote about how she mourned, she grieved the cutting down of the ulu trees in this area that was ordered by the plantation lunas, the managers, and that really these trees were planted by our kupuna long ago, the po'e kahiko of these aina, and they sustained us for generations. And so with these words and with these stories, we carry with us this kuleana as we move forward into the future in our generation, to carry this kuleana for cultivating abundance again for not only our generation, but really for the future generations to come. Next slide. And so, especially over the past couple of years during this time of the pandemic, if you click, two of our organizational goals that we've really had to focus in on is ho'oulu'ai, growing food, restoring abundance and food sovereignty, as well as click, hanai kanaka, which is to feed people. Yeah, drawing upon these not only organizational goals, but foundational values of our people, of our community, of our ohana, growing food so that we can feed our community, feed our ohana, and growing not just enough of it to get by, but growing in abundance of it. That's really the way that our kupuna approached the cultivation of ai, to be able to establish a lahui, a nation here in Hawaii that became one of experts to achieve some of the greatest feats of nations in all of the world, was by having an abundance, like Noah spoke about earlier. And so born out of that click was this vision for Kamaha'ulu o Koholalele, coming together with Dana of the Ulu Co-op, as well as Noah of Malakalu Ulu, to dream up what could be the possibilities for us in making a bold move to not only restore these agroforestry systems that historically existed in Hamakua, but also looking to the future, how we can cultivate that kind of abundance for our keiki and mo'opuna. And that was when we came together with Zach of Ola Design Group to really help bring that vision into a reality in a detailed way for us to be able to implement it. So I'm going to pass it on to Zach now to talk about that design process model.
Mahalo nui. Noeʻau. Aloha kako. Honored to be here. And I'm especially honored to share a bit with you around the design process that this amazing precedent-setting project was informed by. So we initially started out with thinking about the goals of the client, and also what the larger site needed. The INA is a client in a way, in the way I operate as a designer. So we analyze the topography, can go back to the previous slide. We analyze the topography, the water flow patterns, vegetation, and other environmental conditions across this 100-acre project site. And we also did a good amount of boots on the INA time. Next slide. And one clear goal of huiMAU, the client, was to be able to have farmscape construction sheets that they could actually go out in the field with and install these systems of abundance to sustain future generations. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all the different schematics we generated, but these are a few sketches we did as we went through that process. Next slide. Zooming in on a particularly important 8-acre section of the 100-acre site. This is a hub for cultural and future agricultural activities where there will be lots of human powered activity, including a lot of cultural things as well. So this particular agroforestry pattern is informed by syntropic agriculture, which arose out of South America, but has inspirations from elsewhere in the world. Next slide. So this is a more human scale, less mechanized system of agroforestry that Dave earlier spoke about, where most of the plants will be installed in an instant succession or a single planting scheme. We also laid out the farm roads, knowing that this is a production agriculture effort. So straight lines often are more conducive to production ag. Next slide. We also integrated more than 20 tree species, many of which are endemic or indigenous to the islands, and also quite a few shrubs and ground covers as well. This is not an exhaustive list. And this is a specific way of organizing plantings underneath the long-term breadfruit or other tree canopy of plants. A lot of these plants will be phased out over time as the maturing ʻUlu thrive. But some of the functions that some of these plants perform are pollinator habitat, biomass, nitrogen fixation, and soil retention and soil regeneration. Next slide. Further up on the parcel, where a bit further from the main hub of activity, we realized that there needs to be some perhaps mechanized way of allowing larger plantings to thrive. So these patterns were informed by a framework called keyline design, where the trees and also the access roads passively harvest stormwater for the benefit of the plantings themselves. And also the kava, which is alley cropped in between the trees, which are breadfruit and madre de cacao. They can cycle in intervening years between productive ava and biomass or in a fallow state. And those are some of the samplings. And now back to Dr. Noeʻau.
Mahalo nui. So, looking to the future, and as you can see in this photo, we have actually begun the implementation of this initial, 8 acres of planting based on the design that Zach has helped us to develop over the last, few months. And really, you know, this project is one that we hope will be a catalyst for continued growth of ʻUlu agroforestry practices, not only in Hamakua, but on this island, to be able to show the viability of this kind of cultivation of abundance. And that, you know, for us, I'm no expert in this realm of work, you know, and our organization came together around, you know, a vision for our community. And this is one part of a much broader vision for the restoration of health and abundance in our ahupua'a, and understanding that food is foundational to that vision. And so I hope that, you know, everyone can see that there is potential for this kind of work to be done everywhere in Hawaii. And it's not going to look the same everywhere. It's going to look different every place you are. And that's really key to this, is the place specificity of understanding your ahupua'a, your place, your community, and designing around both the historical understandings of our places, as well as looking towards the future in the ways that not only our climate is changing, our communities are changing, but really projecting and planting the seeds that we want to grow in abundance for the future of our lahui, of our aina here in Hawaii. And we've been very fortunate along the way to get the kind of support, not only from folks like Zach, but from folks like Dana and Noah and the ʻUlu Co-op and Mala Kalu'ulu to really help us in bringing this vision as a community grassroots organization into the first stages of fruition. And we hope to continue to move forward in bringing that into full fruition for our ahupua'a into the future. Next slide. So that, you know, these famous ulu forests like the Kalu'ulu in Kona and Kamalu'ulu Olele in Lahaina, that Kamaha'ulu o Koholalele will be one of those famous ulu forests that our descendants generations from now will not only eat from, but will celebrate in Mo'olelo and in Mele. So mahalo nui everybody, and mahalo.
Mahalo Noeʻau and Zach. Thank you for sharing about your project. And Zach also did all the graphic design and schematic illustrations for the agroforestry guide. So thank you, Zach, for that. All right. Let's see. And we have one more case study that we would like to share with you guys. Just adding some spotlights here. Give me one moment. Oh, is Troy, are you still on?
I am.
Okay, I'll find you. We'll start with Harry. So this next project is a collaboration between the ʻUlu Co-op and a few other awesome organizations, including Propagate Venture and OK Farms. And we're going to hear, similar to the huiMAU project, we're going to hear from sort of the lead designer and planner and the farmer boots on the ground. So we have with us Harry Greene, Chief Investment Officer and co-founder of Propagate Ventures, a firm that helps farmers and landowners make agroforestry work for them by balancing short-term income with long-term profits. Harry also farms himself on 50 acres outside of Ithaca, New York, I believe focusing on temperate agroforestry species, chestnuts. And Troy Keolanui is a partner at OK Farms. In 2002, he formed a partnership with Olson Trust to establish OK Farms on the Wailuku River in Hilo. And over the past 20 years, he's worked to transform the property into a thriving, diversified farm, eco-destination, and community site. The farm's success has in large part been built on Troy's vision and farming skills, his long-term relationships with local wholesalers, his continuing willingness to learn and diversify, and above all, his passion for Hawaii Island and the Aina of Hawaii. Harry, would you like to screen share?
Yes, definitely.
All right, go ahead.
Let me know when you can see my screen. All good?
All good. And I just wanted to do a quick time check for folks. It's about 3 minutes until the top of the hour. We're gonna just keep going. So if you have to leave right at 6, no worries, we're recording this. If you can, stay on with us and we will leave some time at the end for a few questions.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you so much, Donna, for the intro and for hosting all of us. And thanks to everyone who's presented for diving into agroforestry in such detail. The agroforestry in Hawaii is potently inspiring to all of us in the cold climates. So I'll dive right in. Agroforestry, we've had an amazing introduction, but it's farming with trees. This is a really potent photo that we show to a whole lot of folks. It's trees with a red tractor next to it if they're unfamiliar with the practice. One of the takeaways that we like to highlight is that trees and crops, or trees in an understory, or multiple species of trees in combination, are generally 40% plus more productive than growing these things in isolation. And with returns kind of below 5% for conventional agriculture, farmers are looking for alternatives like fruit, nut, and timber crops. And one of the takeaways from what I'm about to present is that agroforestry is more than the sum of its parts. Quick example of how that works. So both of these canopies right here are 2D. And when we combine them, we get a whole lot more. So just as an example here, we get 100 units of wood or 100 units of wheat. We have 200 units total from 200 acres. But if we combine them, on each acre, we might get less wood and less wheat. But by taking advantage of the vertical space, on 2 acres, we'll get actually 40% more. So 280 units total. And feel free to screenshot any of these slides to go back and look later. And examples of this, timber and wheat in China, cattle and grass in Argentina, silvopasture, really simple examples. And takeaways there, in cold climates, you get 1.4x productivity with a combination. In the tropics, it's 3 to 5 times as productive. And with ʻUlu specifically, it's really impressive. So if we look at productivity in terms of 3 different things, income, food, calories, and carbon and ecology, these are simplified, but we can look to perennial crops, specifically ʻUlu, as a really potent way to not just farm food, but farm a whole lot more. So a few takeaways here. For breadfruit, the return is competitive, 8%, and then on about 16 acres, that will supply someone with about a $75,000 a year net income, so a salary, if you will. In terms of food, 8.3 million calories per acre. So if you were to only eat breadfruit, if 9.5 people were to only eat breadfruit for a year, 1 acre would supply their caloric needs. And then in terms of carbon, going from, say, a denuded landscape back to a forest, each acre sequesters about 43 tons of CO2, which is 72 round trip flights from Honolulu to LAX. One more metric here, between 1,000 and 1,600 acres of breadfruit would offset white potato imports to Hawaii. So we have to start planting. A few photos here at the Trump farm, the island harvest, the breadfruit silvopasture. And okay, is that my last slide? Let's see. All right, they got reordered. But all right, so if we go back to this kalo here, we can really combine breadfruit with an understory was the takeaway there. So kalo, mamaki, and this farm at OK Farms is what I'm going to dive into quickly in Chrome on our app. It's an agroforestry planning software where you can draw lines and essentially you get yields, cost, revenue, labor assumptions, and a whole lot more. So with here, over 30 years, you can look at how productive is this system going to be. With returns, we can just filter for breadfruit, look at the returns, look at the yield of everything, the revenue in dollars, and then operations, essentially how much does it cost to run the system. Labor similar, inputs, capital, which is infrastructure, et cetera, and then the carbon graph. So with that, I will hand it back to Troy to dive right into what's going on at OK Farms.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on. We here at OK Farms, we are just totally delighted to be part of this project. OK Farms is a small 300-acre farm and part of the Olson Trust. The Olson Trust owns and operates 14,000 acres of agricultural land on the Big Island, including 3,000 acres of macadamia nuts and a couple hundred acres of coffee in the Kau area. But this is, an opportunity for us to take a step in a more sustainable direction, something that we can look towards in the future to transition the land into. And it's my goal to make this a big success through OK Farms and continue to expand on this going forward and keep the Olson Trust lands in agriculture as much as possible. That's pretty much it for me.
Mahalo, Troy. Mahalo, Harry. And for those of you that were like, what is Harry showing us? That was Propagate's amazing software platform called Overyield, which is a really powerful tool to model agroforestry and also do design and financial forecasting. The Hawaiʻi ʻUlu Co-op is really fortunate to have Propagate as a partner. And we are working toward becoming technical service providers using Overyield so that we can bring that tool to more farms in Hawaii. And we're going to be doing a series of workshops with Troy guys at OK Farm over the next few months. The first one is coming up on July 1st. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have a community planting day. So if you're interested in seeing that site, please come out. We'll include more information in the follow-up email that we send to all the participants of this webinar. I think most of the ulu trees will actually be in the ground by then, so it'll be mostly planting the companion crops. And then later on, probably in the fall, we'll have one more educational event where we talk more about the design process, the Overyield software, some of the financial assumptions that Harry shared and so forth. Okay. So that wraps up our content for you today. And it is about 6:04, so maybe we'll just take a few questions from the audience. Let's see. Okay, I think we have a few questions. I'm just kind of looking in the chat here. There's one question specifically for Noel. I think the question is if there's thoughts or plans to create more products from ʻUlu. Actually, not sure that's directed at Noel. I'm gonna pop back into the chat.
So yeah, as far as in context of the Breadfruit Institute, we don't have any plans to create breadfruit products. So we're leaving that to businesses like the Hawaiʻi ʻUlu Co-op to innovate, and they're doing a great job. So I think, yeah, I hope that answers your question as far as I'm concerned. So
thanks, Noel. We have a question for Noeʻau and Zach. The question is, what challenges does the eucalyptus plantation pose for your project development?
That's a great question. We're learning a lot along the way. We have about 5 acres that we've been cultivating now in ʻUlu with other companion plantings, kukui, and other Hawaiian crops. For the last 5 years in Pa'awilo on former eucalyptus plantation lands. There has been, we've done soil studies looking at soil, nutrients and the kind of the depletion of the soil, and especially the microbes in the soil. Soil health is a big thing. Soil, the acidity of the soils has definitely changed a bit. The ability for the soils to absorb and hold water has definitely been affected, but through the process of learning, and with the help of a lot of folks on this panel and learning as we go, utilizing these practices of, regenerative forms of agroforestry, mulching, cover crops, companion planting, we've really been able to see the growth of our ulu trees exponentially over the last couple of years as we've learned and implemented these new practices. So we're still learning. I'd say that's my answer. We're still learning, we're still growing, but for us, the big thing was to try. Everybody told us no can. Once eucalyptus is there, no can do it. No can grow food. And this is our aina, this is where we're from. And so if anybody's got to figure it out, we got to figure it out. And so we're taking it one step at a time to learn and figure it out, and hopefully pass that knowledge on to the next generation to take it to the next phase in learning and growth. So mahalo.
Mahalo, Noeʻau. Zach, did you want to add anything there with regard to the eucalyptus specifically?
Well, I think usually trees are among the last aspects of monoculture that come into certain parts of the islands, and I think this is a nice opportunity to perhaps use trees in a regenerative way, maybe through silvopasture, which we didn't describe very much of, but I think having the trees, there is also an opportunity.
Thanks, Zach. Good way to look at it. Some questions are being answered directly in the text. So thank you, Dave. I think you responded to India's question about specific crop ideas for remediation. And Harry, thanks for responding to the question about NRCS funding. I'll just skip to some of the ones that haven't been answered. So Keith has a question specifically about silvopasture and how to protect the trees from the livestock. Andrew, do you want to field that based on your experience?
Yeah, sorry, just to repeat the question. The question's about protecting the trees from the livestock.
Yes, Keith says, I have hog wire cages around some trees, but my hair sheep will eat whatever they can reach and use the cages for a scratching post.
Yeah, exactly. And that's especially when the trees are young and ulu has soft bark. So like, whereas our mature macadamia nuts, the sheep can scratch on it and the bark's a little bit more hardy. So mature macadamia nuts not as big of an issue. So far our ulu trees are about, I think, 3 to 4 years old now. And we had to prune them up. So we lost productive canopy near the bottom because the sheep would eat them. And then we also had to do protective cages. So in the agroforestry guide, we kind of talked about some of the drawbacks. And that's one of them is that, with a soft bark and soft leaves, the sheep will go after them. But we think once the trees get older and more mature, then you won't have as much of those problems, but we're still learning on that.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think Dwayne at Hana Ranch introduces his cattle when the trees are about 4 years old, and doesn't even try to cohabitate the trees with the livestock until then. So I'm not sure if that would work for sheep, but that's his approach with cattle. Maybe we'll take just 2 more questions. So we have a question from Jenica. She's asking, she's looking for ways to make her system no waste. Would fish or limu-based fertilizer be of interest to the ag community? And if yes, can you point to resources that would teach us how to produce the most useful fertilizer product? This is a huge question that we've had a lot of discussions with our farmers at the co-op about recently, just local materials to create fertilizers out of. Dave, I don't know if you want to add anything about using fish byproduct as an example, or seaweed as fertilizer. Or if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free on the panelist. panelist crew. You want to add anything?
I mean, again, for ʻUlu specifically, they have a really high cation demand, potassium, calcium, magnesium, which seaweeds are really high in. So the synergy between seaweed and ʻUlu specifically is really, really good. And then the fish waste, I mean, people have been working on it, but it's to me, a tremendous opportunity here in Hawaii. I mean, not many people are aware that, technically the longline fishing industry is our largest food producing industry in the state. And there is huge amounts of fish waste generated from that. There is apparently a blood and bone meal production from fish waste on Oahu. Although I've yet been able to find any details on it. And even within the co-op, I mean, Suisan, approached the co-op about potentially taking their fish waste, which is on the order of, was it
7,000 pounds a week?
Yeah, 7,000 pounds a week, which was more than we could handle. But again, there's tremendous opportunities there that I would just say the state is not fully capitalizing on right now. And yeah, it'd be great if somebody could step into that realm and move that bar forward.
There would certainly be a lot of interest among the farming community.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like we should chip some eucalyptus trees and mix it with fish waste and make some great compost.
Yep. Sounds delicious. Maybe just one last question. Ikaika is saying, I have 4 acres in Puna and would like to start an ʻUlu grove. How is ʻUlu planted in that district? Noah, do you want to speak at all to the traditional system in Puna?
Well, yeah, I mean, Puna was a major agroforestry center, exactly because it's a very rocky, young landscape where you couldn't extensively do tuber crops. So you couldn't do kalo, uhi, uala. But the trees, really do enjoy the young lava. Our own farm is on a 2,000-year-old lava flow in Kona. Essentially no soil, very, very rocky. And, I mean, as long as you can get a crack open in the rock and get enough organic matter or soil in there for the tree to take root, they'll pretty much do the rest from there. ʻUlu does not like wet feet. So if you're on a pahoehoe flow, you want to plant on the higher points where the water is going to drain out and not in the depressions where it'll pool. If you're on an ʻaʻa flow, it doesn't really matter because there's good drainage throughout. But yeah, I mean, tree crops are really essential in young flows exactly because their roots can find the little cracks in the lava, follow them down, access the water and nutrients in the way that a lot of annual crops can't.
Thanks, Noah. And there's a lot of great responses in the chat as well. So thanks, Yuri, and others. I think we're going to call it. I know there's some more questions, so feel free to email us if you have follow-up questions. As I said before, we will post the recording on our website, and we'll have a comment option as well. So if you want to post more questions and comments on the blog online, the discussion can continue, and we'll send a follow-up email with that link, more information about OK Farms' upcoming planting day, and other resources. So mahalo again to everyone for joining us, especially to our presenters. Thank you for sharing your mana'o. That was really valuable. Have a great night. Aloha.
Thank you.
Yes, it save the chat. Dialogue. I mean, maybe